Hello. Seems like I'm live. Interesting. Interesting because it seems as if YouTube has changed something, so I cannot choose myself when I'm live, when I'm not. But it tells me that I'm live right now, so that is completely fine with me because I'm ready. I'm ready. It's been so. Welcome back to Karim talks about economics. It's episode 25, and as you might have noticed, it's been a while. It's been a while because I've been traveling a little bit. I went to southern Denmark, then I went on a hike from east to west. Took me 5 days or a week. It's a working week, right? And then I took a couple of days off. Now that I think about it, I actually took an entire week off. And I think that is how I'm going to keep it from now on. Um, I'm not gonna be publishing new episodes every single day, but I'll be doing it less frequently, but also more professionally. In the sense that it will not be as long and it will be more concise and maybe also a little bit more condensed in a way, such that you get a little bit more out of it. And those are some things that I've been thinking about the past week. And if you have any suggestions, please let me know. What I'm thinking about currently is to maybe summarize the news of the week, um, and instead of reading, because I don't know the legality about that actually to begin with, uh, but it might also seem boring for you guys. So therefore, I will just pre-read and then summarize what I've read, the main ideas, and then we can talk about those together. Additionally, I will also start doing some of my own analysis. Those will not be included today. They will be included once I've created something that's worth sharing. Okay. If you have any suggestions, any other suggestions, please let me know. So for you that have not watched this show before, Karim Talks About Economics is a podcast where I, the host, Karim, talk about economics. We talk about a lot of things. We try to relate them to economics. It's the world view of an economist. The podcast is characterized by three things. It's spontaneous, informative, and open-minded. It's spontaneous in the sense that it's less of a presentation and more of a discussion. That's the intent of it. It's also live, right? And that allows you, as a viewer, to come with input. It might diverge what we were going to be talking about. And that is totally fine, because that is what is most important. And secondly, it's informative, in the sense that, yes, of course it has to be entertaining, but it also needs to add value to your life. So there need to be something that you get out of this, beside just its entertainment. So that is the informative, the information that we have in this podcast. May that be the news, or may that be a worldview of someone that you didn't know, a new perspective on life, or just some economics ideas that are boiled down to the basis. And finally, it's open-minded in the sense that we're not bound by any specific ideology, but rather we're open to understand the world from different perspectives as to get an unbiased view of how it is. Usually the agenda so far has been that we go through the news, and since this has been a daily podcast, this made quite a lot of sense that we just went over the headlines of the day. Then we had a follow-up from last time, which is usually answering a question that we proposed last time. Then we had a reading session, which would now be, right, if I'm not going to read, it's going to be a condensed analysis of what I've read. or maybe the headlines of the things that I've read and the ideas that I've uh, come to understand, and I try to articulate those in a very basic way in layman terms, as so that we all understand them together. Now, this reading section is slash interviews. So sometimes we also have some people that come and tell us a little bit about their worldview, and we ask them some questions, and we try to understand the concepts that they bring us and their experience in an economic way, kind of. After that, we have a new thoughts section, which is usually a summarization of what we've analyzed, or what we've read together, or what we have talked about in the interview. And in this section, we also proposed a question that would be answered in the next podcast. And finally, there is a Q&A session, and that makes perfect sense as this podcast is live. Okay, so without further ado, I will bring up the news, and of course, in the 5 days that have gone past, there's a lot of things that have actually happened. As per usual, I'm just going to share my screen, and also as per usual, we're going to start with the corona numbers. I can see that these have been down. These need to be downloaded, so I'm just going to press them, and they might pop up and be annoying, but yes. Okay, so let's look at the numbers here. So last time, podcast number 24, if I remember correctly, there were 17 million cases or something like that. Now we're approaching 20 million, which makes perfect sense, because the pandemic has not gone slow. It's actually been increasing in some countries, as we'll be seeing. Deaths has also increased. However, there is something to notice here, and that is at the bottom right. Here we see that the death rate, if I remember correctly, last time it was at 7%, but now it's at 5%. It means that either we've started to test more and therefore the death rate has decreased, or the virus has become weaker. And hopefully it is the second thing. Because because then the virus would bring less trouble to us. But yeah, expectation is that by Monday we're going to be at 20 million worldwide, of course. That's all the cases, right? Because we have to notice that 12 million have already recovered. That means that the active cases, as we can actually see down here, is only 6 million, right? Which is not very bad globally. My computer is a little bit slow, excuse me. And now we consider the different countries. Those are, of course, the numbers from yesterday, not the numbers for today. Remember that. But the United States is at 5 million. Brazil is at 3 million very soon. And India has become the third place now, has overtaken Russia, and is now at 2 million. We can see that the increase per number of cases every day is still the highest in the United States, with 63,000. Improvement, actually, because it was 70 a couple of days. Brazil, 49. That's stable, I suppose. But we would have expected that to be going a little bit down, but it hasn't been going down. And India, 61. So that is the slight increase, right? It seems as it's not exponential, luckily, but it's more linear. That might, of course, be due to their testing capabilities, but I have not gone into depth with that. South Africa is at 7,000 every single day. Interesting, because that's an improvement for them. With Russia, again, we see that it's very consistent. It's either it's between 5 and 6,000 every single day, and it's near 5,200 and something on in those, and when it's bad, it's 6,400, right? 6,423, 6,454. It's always in that range, right? And when it's a good day, it's fine. It's a little bit, yeah, out there. But let's look at countries that I'm a little bit afraid of. So that's Spain. Spain is at 4,500 now. It was at 3,000 last time you. No, 3,000, that was with me alone looking at it. It was at 1,000 or something like that in the last podcast. 4,000 is a huge increase. We also see that Germany is back at 1,000. France is at 2,000, right? The UK is 800. So apparently the UK is doing better than other European countries. Italy is at 500. And the country that I live in, Denmark, has also started to see an increase. So there is a second wave in Denmark and in Europe in general. Norway has also started to increase. Actually, both Norway and Denmark have more cases, or have had more cases in the past couple of days, more than Sweden. Just not good, because Sweden never totally closed down, while Denmark and Norway closed down. And it doesn't seem from a political standpoint that Denmark is going to close down. So Denmark and I suppose also Norway will now be moving towards the Swedish model. I'm doing this because I don't know exactly if it is, but at least it's the Swedish model, that we're open, but not totally open, right? But we're just going to wear masks and we're going to try to fight this thing. So yeah. I can see here that Saudi Arabia is actually doing better. And now let's consider the death rates, the number of deaths. The US over 150, 164 to be exact, and Brazil is going to hit the 100,000. India is at 42, and Mexico is at 50, and the UK at 46. It's a lot of people, to be honest. And for for yesterday, the US had 1,290 new deaths, Brazil 1,000, India 900, and Mexico, as per usual, the fourth or the fifth, 819. Those are some huge numbers. So that's the lag, right? It's the lagging effect that we're seeing now. So the deaths are increasing because the number of cases 2 months ago had increased, right? We remember when the US was at 300 deaths a day, and we thought, ooh, yes, everything is good. And at that point, also the new cases were at 60 or 70,000, and the president was saying, okay, it doesn't matter, look at our death rate. But now we're going to see that the death rate is going to increase. Sadly, but as expected. And that was for the corona. Let's consider it's actually happening around the world. So something terrible happened, and I don't think we're going to see any pictures of it anymore because it's 2 days old. But there was a huge explosion in Beirut, in the Lebanese capital, where 300,000 people have been displaced, 4,000 people are injured, and 150, and of course a lot of people are still unknown of whether they are alive or not, because there's a lot of ruins, and around 150 deaths. You see that the people are now back. It appears that the people are going to go back on the streets to demonstrate the government, because this is of course something that's unacceptable. And that is totally understandable, of course. And there has been a petition, which is a little bit funny of a story. 60,000 people want the French to come back and rule Lebanon, right? So that really tells you the frustration that there is with the government in Lebanon, which is not a good thing, especially with the corona crisis and now economic and not now, but it has been happening for a while, the economic crisis and unemployment crisis, and now also a huge explosion that's going to displace 300,000. And Lebanon is also a country that has taken on a lot of refugees, both from Palestine and from Syria. So it's going to affect those as well, right? So Lebanon was a country that was very open, very liberal when it came to taking in refugees. So now the question, if its citizens are going to be displaced, i.e. they are the kind of refugees themselves, what are we going to do with the refugees from Palestine and Syria, right? They will be ranked a little bit lower now. There's some trouble there, I think. And you see here that the face covering use expanded in England and Scotland. So yes, it seems as entire Europe now are gonna wear face masks. In my city, Aarhus, face masks are actually per Monday, i.e. in 2 days, they're going to be mandatory in public transports. And that's a little bit scary, maybe, because it really means that we are getting more and more afraid, and the risk of catching the disease has increased. Okay. You also see here a news the President Trump with TikTok. So Trump is the U.S. president, current sitting president, and he's in a public feud with TikTok because he wants to close down TikTok because he's afraid of the privacy of American citizens. Now, this is of course a move to hit China. It's not only a move to protect the Americans, because there is an election in November, supposedly, right? It's in November or December, something like that. Maybe even in October, depends on when he's gonna write it out, right? So there is a presidential election, and he is, or his stand is that he want to blame China. He's also started to call it the Chinese virus again, and there is a lot of public feud about what happened in Hong Kong, and as well about technology, as we see here. And yeah, it's interesting to see what's going to happen, because it seems as if this is a Cold War, to be honest. Okay, let's see. I think we've looked at this, yes. And yeah, I think this is the final one that we're going to be looking at today. The Guardian. See again the thing with Beirut, and here you see some of the things that have happened, right? That's a picture of the disasters, because it was a big explosion. First it started as a fire, and then an explosion came. Now, of course, you're of course familiar with this, but it would be interesting to hear this maybe in 2-3 years, right? Where we've totally forgotten about this. But it was as if a mushroom cloud came up and expanded. And some people describe it as if it was a nuclear bomb, but it wasn't. We know that it wasn't, because there is no radiation, firstly, and also because it started as a fire. It wasn't a bomb. Nothing was detected. So it was something that was in some silos, and then that brought into fire, and it said that it is explosives, and then it went into fire, and then it exploded. Right, the explosions exploded. It is said that it might be Hezbollah that was having some of their things there, using that as a storage unit. But of course, it's a little bit risky to have something like that in a major city such as Beirut. So that's not nice, I think, put very politely. Another news down there at the bottom left, you see that a plane has fallen while landing. It broke into half. It's said in India, and some people have died, and a lot of people have been injured. Okay, so at the bottom left, we see that that's not the news about that, but that has also happened. This is another news. It's about a forest fire. Excuse me. I just supposed it was that, but it wasn't. Well, that's also another news that we have apparently not seen here. Yes. And I think that's it for all the news. And now we're gonna go into the question from last time. Now, of course, you might not remember this, but the question from last time was, how can foreign trade be expanded sustainably using a violent operation of imitation? So that came after reading The Wealth of Nations and reading a section where Adam Smith was talking about how there was two ways of what was it, to grow a nation or something like that, or to make improvements to the nation, and it was either by imitating. Yeah, excuse me. It was growth in foreign trade. How can a country increase its foreign trade? And it's either by taking a direct product from a foreign country and then imitating it and then selling it to the foreign country again, or it is to grow your own economy and then by that sell the things that you're not going to be using. And then the question we proposed was, well, firstly, is it sustainable to do the imitation? Well, Adam says it shouldn't be, right? Because you're not creating the exact need of your citizens. Of course, you can change the behaviors of your citizens and then make it a necessity for them, or make them adopt it, and then increase the use of this in your own country. However, we're talking about foreign trade. So the thing is that maybe if the entire idea is that you're going to manufacture something at a lower price that your foreign country is going to be using, well, the foreign country could just close down and say we're only going to be taking this product from home production. And this, of course, makes sense with China. Let's say that we're producing a lot of cars from China, but then Germany says, well, let's say that it's car manufacturing, and China has seen that Germany is producing a lot of cars, so let's produce some cars and transport them to Germany. Then Germany suddenly says, no, we're going to put a tariff. Well, then if the Chinese citizens don't have the money to buy these cars, or there's not another country other than Germany that they can sell these cars to, well, then it has been an unproductive use of resources. But however, we're trying to understand whether it can be sustainable to do this. Well, to some degree, I suppose it can be sustainable. But that is, of course, by finding some arbitrage opportunities. So some industries and some products where there's not a lot of regulation. And once some regulation have been put into place, you go into a different product that you sell or that you produce and sell to the foreign country. So I suppose in order for the imitation strategy to be profitable, you would have to be constantly changing. So you have to be very agile. You have to be very adaptive and have a quite good knowledge of the market. Because if you don't understand the foreign market, you don't know what the foreign market can do. And now, I also suppose that you would have, and with agility, I suppose I mean, if I may refer back to that, I mean that something with not a lot of fixed costs, because that will fix you to something. And what if the foreign country puts some tariffs or regulations, or it produces itself more such that it can suffice the need of its own and does not need the foreign. So the thing is, you cannot do things where a lot of fixed costs that cannot be switched around and reused for some other thing. You cannot do that if you want to use the imitation strategy to grow your foreign trade. So you cannot build big plans unless you're of course certain then that this country would never be able to, i.e. the foreign country that you're selling to, will never be able to produce this by itself and would never put regulation in place. Maybe if you have a concrete, let's say, contract with them, right? You have to buy from us for 10 years, 20 years, 30, 50 years. That's of course a lot of years. So that doesn't make a lot of sense, and I doubt that such a contract would actually hold. And I suppose that some people would renege this contract. Now, I wrote a small comment on this last time, I can see here, and that is that I wanted to consider electronics and online services. Right? So, what do I mean by phones? I actually wrote, I wrote electronics, but let's say for instance the iPhone and phones in general. Let's take the case of the United States and China, of course. Huawei and iPhone. You could also have taken South Korea, but yeah, with Samsung, but yeah, it's not as big. So the idea is that the United States produced the first phone, but then it produced it in China. So now you had, it's not actually the imitation because it's outsourcing, but then you have the imitation with the Huawei. And if you remember, okay, you don't remember, but I remember that I talked with some of my friends that some of the Huawei phones were just trying to look like the iPhone. And at the very beginning, that was what it was, really. And now Huawei is just imitating, I suppose, the iPhone and imitate. Well, it now has a personality, but beforehand, right? And the basic idea is that it's and let's only consider the fact that they are actually selling it outside, right? Because of course it's also in its own market, but they are selling Huawei phones to the US. And how can they do that? Well, that is because they are producing a good that is a substitute to a good that is in the home country to a cheaper price. That's pretty good. But is this sustainable? Well, in this case, I suppose if they continue to upgrade the Huawei phone, if they continue to compete with the iPhone, it will work. But what if they start to slack and they just see it as we can produce a phone that's cheaper than the iPhone? Well, in that case, it wouldn't be sustainable, because if the iPhone itself is increasing in quantity, increasing in quality, then maybe it won't be a substitute anymore. Another thing that I wrote down, what about online services? So we've seen call centers that have been sent to India and also actually Egypt recently. And why is that? Well, because it's cheaper to do it there. But the question is, are they outsourcing? Well, they actually are. It is imitating the service, exactly. And here it's a perfect substitute, to be honest. Now, of course, for some countries, it cannot be substituted, such as Denmark, for instance, because there's not a lot of other countries that speak Danish, right? So it would be a little bit difficult for some countries. So it's really when you see a large market, and it's only because that countries such as the US and the UK, they are quite sustainably richer than India and a country such as Egypt, that it is sustainable to do this. If the income of the Egyptians increased at that point, they would not be doing this service. It's understandable, right? So how can it be sustainable? Well, that is firstly that the home country doesn't have any need to produce this good itself, or it can't. It's also that you produce a good substitute. So a good or a perfect. And then foreign country. Yeah, I said home country, but I meant home as the country that is going to import it. Foreign country can't produce good by itself. Yes, and I think that's it for answering this question. Now you're back at me. You're back to me, and yes, instead of reading, I read, and now I'm gonna summarize. And if you remember, it was actually a new chapter that we were going to be reading, and it was a new chapter in the in the book of the third book of the different progresses of opulence in different nations. So how did countries become richer, right? And the chapter was called, and it was chapter 4, that was called How the Commerce of Towns Contributed to the Improvement of the Country. So basically, how was it that towns, right, the creation of these towns, made the country richer? And I've written some things down. I want to be honest with you. I don't think that this is the best chapter, not the most entertaining. However, it gave me an idea into what is it that actually cities do. And that's the good thing about The Wealth of Nations, this book. It really boils down everything to its core. And that is maybe because this is a worldview. It's a philosophy. It's a philosophical book more than an economics book, I suppose. um, it really tries to tell you how is the society built and how was it built and what's the expectation for the future as well. Actually. So I don't think I do have it here, but so he says, for instance, for the expectation of the future, he says that Europe is not going to double its population size for 500 years. It's not. And I actually don't think that it has. Now, of course, you've had some booms, but you've also had the wars that have decreased the numbers of people, or the number of people. And you also, he also said that America is going to double every 30 to 25 years, and that is what we see. The US is 350 million or something like that inhabitants, which is quite a large number, right? And Europe is at nearly the same number. It hasn't really increased very much. Yeah. Okay, it was very close. The United States is at 331 million inhabitants. Okay, so he starts out with saying that that cities led to cheaper products. And why? Well, that is because you have a lot of merchants that come together, right, in this city, and then they compete. And that makes sense. It makes sense because we know that more competition leads to lower prices, especially if it's price competition. Which I suppose, well, of course, it's not perfectly price competition, but sometimes it can be totally price competition because you're not going to be selling large quantities in cities, right? You're going to be selling small quantities, and if you're going to be selling one, I was going to say one apple, but let's say 1 kilogram of apple. Another person can also supply it with 1 kilogram of apple, and therefore they become perfect competitors. It's not that I'm going to sell you 1 ton of apples versus 1 ton, and then the other person cannot sell you a ton, and therefore he's a monopoly now, right? That's not how it is. It's a kilogram versus a kilogram, or 1 apple versus 1 apple, and that's perfect competition, really. To some degree, of course. Now, of course, there can also be a distance, but the idea of towns makes such that it's as if you're competing in the same exact spot. That's at least a philosophical idea that Adam brings to the table about cities and towns. Secondly, he also says that merchants are more productive and profitable in their investments than countrymen. And he says that makes sense because the merchants will try. Yeah, and he discusses a lot about merchants versus country gentlemen. But he's very happy with these merchants because he says that they do investments. Both countrymen and country gentlemen and merchants, they throw their money out and then they try to bring it back in products. However, the merchants are more profitable, maybe because they actually produce something, while the country gentlemen hire people, and those people do something, and they get wages, right? While the merchant may actually be buying a product that he can sell for a higher price, and he will be earning the profit, while when you hire people, you will not be earning a lot of profit. Now, something that I don't have here is also he also discusses the idea that not sure if this is important, but the idea again of the effect of not being able to divide the land but keep it as one bunch. that produces lazy people. And so he also sees these country gentlemen as lazy people, rather than merchants that actually work. Now, something that he also says is that workers are as dependent and serve the business owner as much as the soldiers obey the orders of their prince. So he sees the workers in factories, or the workers in a supermarket. Now, of course, they didn't have supermarkets at that time. Or the workers, the servants in the house, sees them as dependent on the businessman as the soldiers are dependent on the orders of the prince. Yes. It doesn't relate to the above point, but it relates to the idea maybe of capitalism, and that was also the idea here, that they are dependent on the businessman because he's the one who's going to pay them the wage. He is the one that's going to give them their subsistence to live, and therefore they will obey him and do what he asks of them, as soldiers would do for their prince, because they have an oath. Now, one thing is an oath, and the other thing is, I need my subsistence. Then he goes into discussing the idea that some cities are more autonomous than others. And he says that the king cannot control from above and would have the country to be ruled by militia that they would obey. And that, I suppose, well, what is meant here is, now that is of course something that he was not, of course, it wasn't made at that time, but it's a local government basically. It's a municipal. It's a municipal, right? It's a city. It's a municipal. It's a governor, right? Now, today we vote for them, but in old times it was the one who owned the most land. If we're talking about workers that are going to obey their businessman, so it was the one with the largest business, maybe, or maybe the person with the largest force, the one who was the strongest, the one with the strongest family ties or something like that. But the families he has another point for. So it was the idea of the creation of local governments, and thereby you would not have a lot of rebellion, but the king would just allow people to obey these local militia, or the strongest local militia, instead of fighting with them over the control of the country, which he would at the very end not even be able to, not even after winning the war, would be able to control. Then he says that this might be caused by the long leases. Well, there's not a direct causality here that he says, but that is what I take out of it. That long leases led to to less control of the landlord, right? So the tenants would control the country, not the country, but the land. They would make their own laws, and it's only if something is written in the contract or something is directly regulated that the landlord would have anything to say, really. So he's talking about the idea of who has the power, the tenant on the, or the landlord, and you could argue that the landlord here on a larger scale is the king, and these local militia are the tenants, right? And the tenants have the control to rule the country and to rule the land, I mean, and to rule, or the specific area, and to rule the people and make their laws unless they are stated in the lease, right? To some degree, right? To some degree. After that, he starts talking about families. And he here relates to Arabic and Persian countries that are family based, and he says that Europe is not like that. And it is not like that because it's commercial nations, where, and that again, that relates back to the idea of merchants versus country gentlemen, because he says that country gentlemen would eventually get poor because they don't have the mindset that when they spend money, they also have to get it back. They cannot just spend it as they wish. And of course, in a country that is commercial, based on capitalism, I suppose, the one who can create the most profit is the one that is going to have the capital because he can allocate it the best. But families would eventually grow weak, and not eventually, because that is the observation that he sees and that he describes in the book. Families would eventually reach a generation that would just see this as, yeah, our money that we just have to spend. Would not see it as a business. And he says that's a problem, and he doesn't say that this is a problem, but that is the observation in Arabic countries, because they are not commercial. It's more tribes, it's more families, and we also see that in those countries, the merchants will not try to, let's say it, compete. They would try to suffice these families and try to earn some money from them. Now, he says that regulation have played a role in making Europe a commercial country, or Europe a commercial country, but the countries in Europe to be commercial. And then he describes the growth, the population growth. So he says that the population growth has stagnated in Europe. Population growth has stagnated in Europe, but doubled in America. Why? Well, because Europe is concentrated on manufacturing and commerce, while America is concerned with, and its main focus is agriculture. And agriculture, as Adam has described plenty of times before, is the thing that produces the most profit, and therefore it also produces the most wealth, and therefore you would have the incentive to maybe give birth, and those would be able to grow the country and grow the country and grow the country. Now, he relates this to the idea that there is a lot of land abundant, a lot of fertile land that is abundant in the Americas, and few that are abundant in Europe. I actually wrote a quote down, which is, there are always more capital, and that is about Europe. This quote is about Europe. So, there are always more capital to buy than there is land to sell. So that what is sold always sells at a monopoly price, right? So let's assume that the entire country has been privatized. Well, then you have to buy it. But from a seller's perspective, if I sell it, I will not have it, and I cannot have it twice. Because it's inelastic. It's perfectly inelastic. Supply is inelastic in the sense that I cannot supply more land if everything has been privatized. And therefore I will sell it at a monopoly price, try to earn the entire surplus. And therefore land is quite expensive. And that's a problem. It's a huge problem, to be honest. He says, for the growth, for the future growth, or at least the rate of growth. Because we know that agriculture is, and the cultivation of land is the thing that is going to produce the most profit, most good. And if we don't have more of it, what are we going to do? It might be the reason why the UK started to colonize things in order to get more land, to grow faster. Now, however, we know that it was unprofitable because they did it in an unprofitable way. Because they didn't privatize it. It was the government that run. Okay, I'm not perfect into this, but our understanding is that it was a colony, i.e., it was owned by the government. Now, of course, you can have some private, but it wasn't perfect, right? It wasn't perfect competition. It wasn't a perfect market. It was an obscure market, and I'm not going to go into more depth because the comparison was more about Europe and America, not Europe and its colonies. Okay. And lastly, he had a point about how countries were protecting themselves. So he says that there is a lot of, he doesn't say because this is not a direct quote, but there's a lot of laws that protect agricultural products. And he says that the goods from cultivating land is to some degree considered at monopoly price. Now, of course, we know that we know because of Adam Smith that agriculture is the most profitable venture. But the thing he says is that, well, it could be that someone is going to be transporting things into us. But we're not going to allow this. If a country has at some point, and I think he's relating to the UK, but in periods where we don't have a lot of produce, we're actually gonna reduce or halt entirely the import from other countries, such that we are sure that we're gonna sell our own things first, right? Such that we can actually improve our own production. And when we have much, then we're gonna sell, right? Then we're gonna open up also for trade, because then we can compete. But if we're gonna import and we already don't have enough, then we can't really compete. And the idea is that you really, or at least the United Kingdom at this point, really wants to sell its own produce. He also said that at some point, or at least until 10 or 20 years from the writing of this book, you could not buy sheep from Ireland. It has been entirely closed down, because that's also agriculture, because you want to produce it yourself. Right? So agricultural products are going to be sold at a monopoly price. Now today we see that they are being subsidized. Maybe they are subsidized as to reach their monopoly price, but I don't know. But I know that the main products, such as fruits and no. It's better to say that not the main products are protected in Europe, but the products that are not main, such as some fruits, well, they can be imported into Europe. But corn and such, it's impossible to sell corn from outside Europe into Europe, because you want to sell your own corn first and then export the rest. because that is what's really producing the GDP. That is the thing that's going to increase the country the most, increase the productivity of the country the most, because it is the most productive thing, agriculture. As we know that, for you that have not seen the previous episodes, Adam claims that, and I suppose I agree with him, agriculture is the most profitable way of producing anything, because you have something that you don't pay for that works for you, which is nature. So nature sometimes brings you rain, it brings you the soil, and the plant and the animal can grow by itself. It's not that you have, now of course you have to feed it, but he says to some certain extent, 30% is produced by something that you're not really paying for. It's for free. So the sun comes up for free. It's not that you have to pay the sun to come up, right? And that's the idea. That's the idea, that it's the most profitable thing, and therefore we also need to sell it at a monopoly price. I suppose that's his point. That's that chapter. And next time we'll be considering a new book, which is of systems of political economy. The first chapter is of the principle of the commercial and the mercantile system. So, of the principle of the commercial or mercantile system. And personally, I like political economy, but of course, I don't know what political economy is in all times. That's going to be interesting for me, at least. And I think now it's time to write a question for next time. What can be a question for next time? Well, agriculture, I suppose we've talked about for a lot. Country gentlemen, we've to some degree also talked about that. Leasing, tenants, the relationship between the tenant and the landlord is to some degree interesting, I suppose. I suppose to some degree we have answered the question why, and Adam gives us a good answer why. A long rental contract decreases the control of the landlord. Yeah, the idea was that maybe I would ask a question about that, but I think it's pretty clear. Well, let's ask a question about land then, right? How can, and here I relate it to the privatization of land right now. So how can does it make sense? What are you thinking about, Karim? Well, I'm thinking about maybe how can land but it is true that land is going to be a monopoly commodity when it's private, when everything is privatized. But yeah, let's go into the thing with colonies then, right? And let's create maybe an answer that is going to really dig into that. So how can countries that have privatized their land create more profitable land? It's a very weird question, I know. So the question reads, how can countries that have privatized their land create more profitable land? And the idea is that maybe I don't control the land anymore and it's been privatized. Well, what if the people just say, okay, I'm just going to leave it be. You want it back? Buy it. What is it that forces people to actually produce something on the land, right? How can we make them be even more profitable? Are we going to put a quota on having the land? And if not, we're going to take it back. The state is going to take it back. Or are we going to try to create more land out of the blue, right? So we see countries that actually fuel sand into the ocean, and here I'm referring to the United Arab Emirates, to produce more land, basically. Right? So I suppose that's a question for next time. Thanks for hanging on. Thanks for staying with me. And let's see if there's any questions. I can see sleep, not this guy again. I have no idea who that is. Ruben Hike. Okay, it's not very nice to say, but it is what it is. So that was the podcast. Thanks for your attention, and as per usual, a motivation. And I'm gonna be relating that motivation to maybe the hike trip that I had. It was 135 kilometers that I walked with my friend Nikki, that I've actually had on the podcast, and we walked it in 5 days. Quite an achievement, if you ask me. But the motivation is to set some goals, right? Maybe some big goals and some small goals. Make it manageable. Because at the second day, we were tired. Let's put it like that. Let's put it very politely. We were very tired because we walked 40 days the first day and it was raining. There was flies everywhere because we were out in the fields, and usually there are flies out there because of manure. So we were about to give up on the main goal. But why give up on the main goal? Because then we started to put manageable small goals. Then we said that we want to achieve this by 12 o'clock, and this by 4 o'clock, and this by 6 o'clock. And then we walked the entire thing. And one thing that I kept in mind was to put it as a goal that we actually needed to reach the very end of this hiking tour. We had to reach what is called Blåvand in Denmark. It's a beautiful beach. One of the only beaches actually with sand in Denmark, or very beautiful sand at least. Let's put it that way. And the motivation is that you have to put a goal, and you have to understand that along the way it's gonna feel unmanageable, and you're gonna have the feeling that you might need to give up on that goal. That it's not manageable. It's impossible. But that's only because you want to have it easy. It's because of the planner and the doer. You have a planner that has planned something, but then the doer gets really tired. So the idea is that you have to be aware that you will be tired. You have to be mentally capable of telling yourself, today I'm going to be tired. But I'm doing this because I need to achieve that. Now the question is, well, what if you then at the middle of everything you say, I can't, I'm just going to achieve that, which is lesser of a goal. Never do that. Then take a step, take a break, but still imagine the big goal. Then take another step, imagine that goal. But never give up on the big goal. Never give up on the big goal. Maybe change the small goals that you have to do in the meantime to reach the big goal. But never lose sight of the goal that you want to achieve. Do whatever you need to do along the way. Now, of course, don't do anything illegal. And with us, it was only walking. So maybe change it along the way. So we wanted to walk maybe 27 each single day, but then we walked 40 because we couldn't find a place to sleep. And then we walked 30, and then we walked 20, and then, right? So you might have to adjust along the way. But remember that all of this is to achieve a goal at the very end, and never change the end goal, because it is worthwhile. It is worthwhile to hang in there and stay strong. Thanks for your attention, and I hope you've had an amazing week, and I look forward to hosting these podcasts more and more. Thanks for your attention. How do I end this?